Share via email. Report story. By Omithian. Summary. Ochako knows that she must find a suitor soon in order to help better her family name, and this ball is the best opportunity. However, she must fight her insecurities and understand that she is worth more than as a wife. Maybe then, she'll find a match that is worthy of her. Equals 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 dot. As the daughter of merchants, Ochako knew she was in need of a husband that would help her family rise above their station. They had been in the same business for generations, but money had begun to dwindle in the years before Ochako's birth, and she had been born with the knowledge that a marriage bound by love was not in her future. She had despaired only briefly over this. For however much she dreamed of love, she knew that it was not logical, at least not for a young woman in her position. She was an only child. It was not only her duty to enter a good match, but her family's one hope. Her parents did their best not to pressure her, always reassuring her that they would be more than happy if she were to fall in love, but she couldn't do that to them. She loved them too dearly. That was enough love for her. The upcoming ball had Ochako's stomach in knots. This would be her best chance at finding a suitable husband, or at least capturing the interest of an appropriate young man. She hoped they would be young at least. Though she was determined to find the best match, or at the very least a decent one, she did not fancy herself marrying a much older gentleman. It would do her poorly when it came to bearing children. Not that she wanted to think of that much either. "You look beautiful," her dearest friend, Suyu, reassured her as they made their way to the ball. Suyu's family was better off than Ochako's, but they were still considered noive rich. Even worse for Suyu, she had two younger siblings. As the oldest girl, she had to marry to befit her station, unless she wanted to rely on her family, seeing as how her brother would inherit her family's estate. Ochako picked at her dress. "Are you certain? Perhaps pink was too aggressive of a color." Suyu's family owned a carriage that had allowed them to arrive at the ball in a stately fashion. Ochako did not think she had the heart to show up alone on a horse again. She loved riding and excelled at it, but apparently it was not a trait expected or wanted in a wife. The last time she had done so, men and women alike had sneered at her, which had put her in a foul mood the entire evening, something she did not need help with. She already didn't like rubbing elbows with those in old money. Honestly, she needed to fix her poor attitude, or she was like to end up an old maid. Once they arrived at the Yaoyorozu's massive estate, Ochako and Suyu made their way inside. They were late, although not terribly so, but were forgiven because of the recent poor weather. Ochako had been forced to discreetly wipe the mud off her shoes before entering, hoping that the staff hadn't seen her. She had been considering being hired on as a maid to help supplement her family's income, but it would only ruin her chances of finding a suitor if it was found out. "Do try to dance this time," Suyu told her as they stepped into the ballroom. "You're beginning to become known as difficult." Ochako tensed up. "It's not my fault that those men were too forward with their unseemly intentions." "You're picky," Suyu pointed out. "I'm only trying to find the best match that will help my family," Ochako murmured stubbornly. Suyu sighed. "You are sabotaging yourself because you are afraid." Her words struck a chord in Ochako's heart and she hesitated as they walked through the room. She couldn't look her friend in the eye, which told the other young woman everything she needed to know. Do you still dream of finding a match with love? Promoted stories. You'll also like Return of Mokuden discontinued 3.5K45. This story is officially up for adoption. If anyone is interested, message me or comment on the story. The Heroes Return MHAXJJK, ongoing 115K 1.7K in Quad, Izuku. Midoriya, after being betrayed and killed, vanishes leaving hurt people behind. After 2 months and a hack, he come back, changed. How will the class re? Izuku's Harem Academia 190K 1.8 Qst. Read. Free. Oni Shots 150K 3K. This is a collections of free X readers. Requests on this are now closed. Zero Deku Oni Shots 31.5K 798. Because of circumstances, this book won't be continued unfortunately. Feel free to check out my other stuff. Thank you for understanding. Mirko X Shy Male Reader 173K 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Much needed love. Yandere Succubus Momo X Izu. 51.9K 826. After Wattpad had decided to delete this story out of nowhere, I and many reader were distraught. So I'm making a remake of the story from the ground up to compensate. Compensate. No, Ochako answered honestly. I've not the time to entertain silly daydreams. So caught up in the maelstrom that had taken over her mind and heart, Ochako was paying little attention to what was in front of her and tripped over a man's foot. She let out a gasp as she fell forward, Suyu too slow to catch her. Luckily for her and much to her embarrassment, Ochako fell into the arms of a young man who had been standing innocently by the fire. Are you all right, my lady? A concerned voice asked. Ochako lifted her head and found herself staring into a kind face with the brightest green eyes she had ever seen and a spatter of freckles. She was grasping his arms tightly, but it was his grip on her that held her up. If he had not caught her, she would have no doubt fallen on her face. Even though she hadn't, blush flooded her cheeks as she scrambled to her feet and muttered a quick, "I'm quite fine. Thank you for your assistance." The young man blinked, but then seemed to realize that he was still holding onto her. He let go of her quickly and took a step back to put an appropriate space between them.
Oh, stop it.
Them. You're welcome. His cheeks had turned a light pink as well. A red-haired gentleman of the same age clapped him on the back, a cheerful grin on his face. Your first ball here and pretty ladies are already throwing themselves at you. Midoriya, if I'd known you were this charming, I would not have brought you along. I didn't throw myself at him, Ochako insisted stubbornly. I merely tripped. It was purely an accident, Kirishima, the green-eyed gentleman, Midoriya, added. His friend eyed her carefully, though there was humor in his gaze. Do you dance as clumsily as you walk? Ochako had to force herself not to ball her hands into fists, but the men must have caught her flexing her fingers at her sides from the way they flickered down and then back at her face. What was it that Suyu had told her mere moments ago? Try to dance this time. Her friend stood at her side, giving Ochako the time to speak. She was gracious like that. Most women in need of a suitor would have interjected by now since Ochako was giving off an abysmal first impression. If you were to ask me later, then I suppose you will find out for yourself, Ochako quipped. The red-headed gentleman's face split into a smile again while Midoriya raised his eyebrows marginally. Her heart dared to skip a beat. It was more interest than she'd been shown in months, truth be told, and she had gotten it by being herself. Before she and Suyu could walk away, Midoriya cleared his throat. Your name, if I might ask. Ochako turned back to face him. He was looking at her in such a straightforward manner that it caught her off guard. The last time anyone had looked at her like that, It had been in an attempt to get under her petticoat. Midoriya held himself in a way that was very respectable though, and she found herself opening up despite her usual hesitance towards those clearly of a higher station than her. Ochako Uraraka. She held out a hand. A pleasure to meet your acquaintance, even if it was in an unusual circumstance, Midoriya replied earnestly, taking her hand and kissing the top of it. Oh no, this was not good. Well, it was good, but then it wasn't. She had just thought of him as respectable, but that act had been terribly brazen. Both of them seemed to realize it at the same time, and he dropped her hand like he'd been burned. Burned. A nervous smile twitched onto his face. Izuku Midoriya, I hope I can speak with you later this evening. A cold chill ran down her spine. Of course, Ochako barely managed before turning and all but rushing away. Her cheeks were still burning when Tsuyu caught her by the table where a large spread of hors d'oeuvres were laid out. She had always been something of a nervous eater, especially at these parties where the food was so wonderful and expensive. There were cheeses from other countries and wine with names that she wouldn't dare try to pronounce in fear of sounding foolish. The Yaoyorozus had an actual chef in their employ for the meals at home, and he had done wonders for the event today. At least Ochako could say that she could cook. That had to be a desirable skill in a wife. You should try these, Tsuyu, Ochako said, popping a small lavender shortcake into her mouth. They're delectable. Herself from what had just occurred, and Tsuyu knew it, judging from the unimpressed look on her face. Even the food looks beautiful. I don't know how they manage it. Tsuyu sighed. I won't push the matter since you are embarrassed, but try not to avoid him all night. He was very pleasant. She picked up one of the shortcakes that Ochako suggested. You know who he is, don't you? It would do well to speak with him again. Ochako's mouth went dry. Of course she knew who he was now that she knew his name. Word had spread around town when Yagi Toshinori had named an heir to his estate. Very few people had heard of the name Izuku Midoriya, but now he was the heir to a family that was dripping with old money. The fact that she'd fallen into him of all people was why she'd basically run away. Trying to hide her nervousness, she'd picked up a cup of Madeira wine from a passing servant. The most she'd ever drank was white wine her parents used for special occasions, and the sweetness of the red wine surprised her, but it was at least distracting as a warm tingle settled over her middle. As if her eyes had a mind of their own, they found Midoriya in the crowd, a smile on his face as Miss Utsushimi spoke with him. Ochako took another sip of the wine and found the glass almost empty. He could be pleasant to anyone, not just her. She was nothing special. She didn't have anything like this to give a suitor. All she had given him so far was embarrassment, although he hadn't seemed irritated or disdainful towards her. She wondered how his opinion of her might change should he find out her family's status. He wasn't from here. He didn't know her yet. You made it, a woman's voice exclaimed. Turning around, Ochako was greeted by the lady in whose honor this ball was being thrown. Momo Yaoyorozu was tall with thick black hair that she had done up in a beautiful array and intelligent dark eyes. Her dress showed the appropriate amount of skin, smooth and perfect, and displayed the curve of her body just enough without being too much. Not only did she come from a wealthy family, but she was beautiful as well. As shameful as it was, Ochako could remember being jealous of Momo, daydreaming that she could be just as pretty and desirable. If she did not have Momo's wealth, she could at least be attractive. Surrounded by this incredible display made those old feelings come back, especially considering that tonight's ball was being thrown to celebrate Momo's engagement, but she buried them deep and brought a smile to her face. She would not sour this night for one of her friends. Clasping hands with Momo, Ochako proclaimed, "I would not miss it for the world." Having being raised in a household that was much more formal, Momo kept her physical contact to a minimum even with her. She had always been more proper, although she was putting on even more airs in front of her family and guests. Ochako could not fault her that, not when she was doing it herself. "I'm so happy for you." When Ochako heard the news of your engagement to Shoto Todoroki, she rushed over to tell me in the middle of my siblings' tutoring, Suyu added. Even though it was a little embarrassing, Ochako giggled at the memory. She had been half out of sorts, mud staining the bottom of her dress, when she'd burst in waving the invitation around in the air. "He's an excellent match for you," Ochako said. "Your fondness of him certainly doesn't impede matters." Momo's cheeks turned pink. "My parents didn't know that we were already familiar with each other when they began to talk with his father." A secret romance turned into a prosperous marriage. Ochako teased. Momo leaned forward to shush her and cast furtive glances around the room, but no one had heard them. She had made sure to be quiet. She could still remember when Momo and Shoto had first met a year ago. The attraction had been obvious to her, although Momo hadn't seen it from his end, convinced that she was foolish for becoming smitten so quickly. Shoto was notoriously difficult to read, impassive to the point of coming off as cold. He was also the heir to the Todoroki fortune and perhaps the most prized bachelor in the country outside of royalty. He had to be careful about the young ladies he spoke with, and so he very rarely showed any interest. However, when Shoto had approached Ochako later to ask about Momo, she had realized his true intentions, shy as they were. He'd asked her to pass a letter on to Momo. It was incredibly forward for someone who kept even his close companions at an arm's length and had never showed clear interest in anyone before. Finding herself as the go-between to the two of them had been strange, but Ochako had been childhood friends with one of the Todoroki household servants. Seeing them together now, no longer hiding their feelings for one another, was a blessing. It also brought a dark cloud over her mind. As if reading her thoughts, Momo said, "Soon enough, we'll be hearing the same good news for you." The smile on Ochako's face felt forced and she could only hope that the other two wouldn't notice. We all know of my plans to become a spinster with 3 dogs, 2 chickens, and a goat. If you keep glaring at any gentleman that looks your way, you will be, Momo said knowingly. I've told her just as much. Suyu put in. Ochako bit her tongue to refrain from saying anything too sharp. Sharp. This was Momo's day and she would not ruin it with her insecurities and envy. Momo was kind and bright, friendly to a fault. It was not her fault that she had been born to such a wealthy family. It was not her fault that Ochako's family had fallen in status. Her friends cared about her and worried for her future. Besides, they were only teasing. They didn't truly believe that she'd end up alone. She would find a husband. Still, surrounded by such insurmountable wealth and a future that she could only dream of, a petty darkness clung to Ochako's heart that she could not shake, at least not in front of her friends. Some battles had to be defeated on their own and she was determined to make the best of this night, if not for herself, then for them, but she needed a moment of reprieve to do that. Would you excuse me for a moment? A concerned expression crossed Momo's face. Are you all right? Oh, of course. Light laughter bubbled from Ochako's lips, though it was every bit intentional. That cup of wine was stronger than I expected on an empty stomach. I only need a bit of air. Suyu stepped in as usual. I'll come with you. No, Ochako jumped in, a little too hastily to come off as casual. You should mingle with Momo. She placed a hand on her friend's arm. I'll be back before you know it. There was a suspicious gleam in Suyu's eyes, but she nodded her head. If you insist. She really was a wonderful friend. Ochako did not know what she would do without her. Should she get married before her, more than likely, Ochako would be forced to find out. It was a painful thought to swallow. After giving Suyu a reassuring smile, Ochako left them, slipping through the crowded room until she found the doors that led to the balcony. Now that the sun had fallen, very few people would be outside. It was pleasant during the day when the sun was up, but the night brought a chill that most did not like. Regardless, she stepped outside. The second she closed the doors, a hush fell around her, the sounds of the ball muffled. She took a deep breath of the cool air. There was just enough light from inside to cast a soft glow on the area. She walked to the edge of the balcony, laying her forearms on the railing so that she could gaze down at the expansive garden below. There was even a fountain and a maze. How could she ever compete with this? Every eligible bachelor in there would look at all this and want it, not her. Ochako shook her head. She couldn't think like that. She shouldn't have allowed herself to get so worked up she'd find a match. If she didn't, well, she would find another way to save her family. She'd find a way to make money so that they could keep their quaint house, land, and the few animals that they owned. Whatever it took, she'd make them proud to have her as their daughter. The first step she had to make was to walk right back in there and show Suyu that she could do this. Her friend was right. Maybe she had been sabotaging herself. It was just that whenever someone showed any interest in her, she couldn't find it to be genuine. She'd suffered humiliation before. Once, a handsome gentleman had asked her to dance and she'd accepted, only for him to laugh, as if he would ever dance with her. After all, her palms were rough from chores and labor. Educated as she was, having two learned parents, she was mocked for not having been taught by a governess and teased that becoming one herself would be the only way she'd ever survive should she not get married. Surely not everyone could be so snotty. There had to be someone in there who would find her spirit and fight to be admirable, someone who liked a young lady with a will of her own, someone who didn't mind that she was poor and a daydreamer. She'd show Suyu that she could be cheerful and of good nature. She would dance, laugh, smile, and do everything she was supposed to do. However, when Ochako turned around, she caught a glimpse of her friend through the window and froze. Suyu was talking with a young man that wore nearly all black. She looked more than attentive about what he was saying, she looked interested. What would she do if Suyu was married before her? She wouldn't be able to rush over to her friend's house at the drop of a hat, barging into her family's home like a dog trying to escape the rain. It was a very likely possibility that Suyu would move away once married should her husband not live nearby. Ochako would be alone then, left to her own devices and ever-running mind. A terrible part of her that she was desperate to hide wanted to storm inside and interrupt them. She wanted to take Suyu and leave this place. It was a selfish thought that made her feel sick to her stomach. The two of them had grown up together and had always been a part of each other's lives. It wasn't that she didn't want Suyu to find a match and be happy, it was just that she was afraid she wouldn't. Thinking such things made her feel shameful all over again and she turned her back to the room. Maybe she should stay out here. She didn't want to ruin this night. The door opening startled Ochako, but when she looked back, thinking that it was Suyu, she was surprised to see that it was Midoriya. He cringed and gave her a sheepish smile. "Pardon my intrusion, but would you mind if I joined you out here?" At first, Ochako thought to tell him that she wanted her privacy, seeing as how she was not in the best of moods and embarrassed over tripping onto him earlier. Then she noticed the way that he kept glancing inside and fiddling with the cufflink on his right sleeve, twisting it round and round. He didn't even seem to realize what he was doing. She quickly recognized that the cufflinks he wore were more expensive than her entire outfit, but he was treating them poorly. Midoriya was nervous and doing a very terrible job at hiding it. Everyone at the ball, especially the young women, would eat him alive. As long as you promise not to attempt any unseemly moves, Ochako told him dismissively, although she knew that he meant her no harm. The hint of a smile on her face betrayed her and his smile broadened before he stepped fully out onto the balcony and shut the door behind him. She was more than capable of throwing him over the railing before he tried anything inappropriate with her. Once he was standing beside her, Midoriya relaxed with a sigh. "I'm not used to these functions." She tilted her head curiously and he glanced at her. "At least not from this side. I've attended multiple etiquette lessons and I've been to a handful, but He turned his gaze to the garden below them. "I know more about handing out hors d'oeuvres than eating them." Ochako perked up, as a servant. Midoriya rubbed the back of his neck anxiously. Not exactly. Her furrowed brows must have told him that she didn't understand. Embarrassed as he was, he didn't hide the truth from her. I grew up alongside Shoto and Katsuki. You know him, yes. She nodded her head. Who didn't know the heir to the Bakugo estate? The family isn't of much wealth, but we used to be. We've fallen quite a bit of ways. In order to make money to keep us afloat, I'd often volunteer my services to the Todoroki and Bakugo families. Schooled as she was in hiding how she felt, Ochako could not hide her shock. You worked for them. Well, it's just been my mother and I since I was 3, Midoriya explained. Any other woman in his mother's position, a single woman scorned, would have floundered, but come years later, her son was the heir to a wealthy estate and considered one of the most sought-after young men in the country. We had to do what we could to survive. It's difficult for a young woman who was not properly divorced to find employment. In spite of his words, he smiled. She took care of me though. She raised me to become the man I am today. I cannot be more grateful. It should have made her feel sad, but instead Ochako could only think of how much his mother had overcome. She had been able to do what most women didn't think they were capable of. Not only had she raised her child alone, but she had taught him so well that a man of great importance had recognized his potential and taken him under his wing. Midoriya had saved his family, just as Ochako wanted to save hers, except his had been in an even worse state. Who knew what Ochako could be capable of if she set her mind to it and worked as hard as them? This celebration would not be much a problem if not for. Midoriya cut himself off, shaking his head. Ochako was curious though. If not for what? The idea that someone else was struggling here made her feel sympathetic and ashamed. She should have seen this earlier. Midoriya leaned down so that his forearms were propped on the railing and looked down at his hands. All the unbetrothed ladies and their fathers trying to force them on me. He hung his head. The women are trying so hard to please me so that I might take a shine to them, and their fathers are even worse, listing their daughters' attributes like their livestock. It's shameful, isn't it? Uraraka hummed thoughtfully. What young women amount to these days? I'd never considered it before, Midoriya admitted. I never saw the way that girls would parade themselves in hopes that Shoto or Katsuki would notice them. He looked as if he wanted to bury his face in his arms. It would be unbecoming of a young man of his stature, but then, this was relatively new to him. He was worse at these things than she was. And now it's happening to me and I don't know what to do. Seeing that he was confused, Ochako took a different route and put on a lofty expression. Boasting of how desirable you are we? She teased. That is not attractive in a man of your status. Midoriya straightened up like a board. I would never. He blushed and she had to fight the urge to giggle. I'm not used. Such attentions were never placed on me growing up. He bit his lip, looking ashamed, and Ochako felt a dash of guilt over the jest. I don't want to take away from the importance of this ball. I'm here to celebrate Shoto and his betrothed, not find myself a wife. Oh, Ochako bit her lip. Lip. That was what she had thought to do tonight. Had she been so focused on herself that she forgot what was truly important? Midoriya would need to find a match soon. The whole issue surrounding his being raised to such a high station was that Mr. Toshinori had never produced an heir. If Midoriya wanted to avoid the same problem, he would need to be married sooner than later. Despite the fact that he had to know this, he had considered his friend first. Well, if you're wanting to avoid a quick match, I would be wary of Miss Yutsushimi, Ochako told him. She's a very lovely and delightful young woman, but she is known to become attached quickly. I wouldn't be surprised if she sets her sights on a suitor tonight. She tapped her chin thoughtfully. I would also steer clear of Miss Himiko. She isn't cruel, per se, but she is known to be particularly aggressive when it comes to prospects. His laughter was wholly unexpected, but it wasn't the carefully cultivated laugh that she was used to hearing at these functions. It was unpolished, like hers. After having been told that she had an unattractive laugh once, she refrained from laughing or forced small ones only when expected. Somehow she could tell that he wasn't laughing at her, but over the situation that they had found themselves in. Even more so, it was genuine. Are there any young women that would be fortuitous for me to mingle with? Midoriya asked. Miss Asui is my dearest friend and one of the kindest and most wonderful people I know, Ochako answered. You met her earlier. She twisted her lips in thought. Miss Hagakuri is fair and of good nature, along with coming from a family of moderate fortune. Miss Ishido is not from around here, but she is quite comfortable to be around and would be an excellent prospect as well if you were looking to expand the Toshinori estate. Miss Hatsume's family is well off with a prosperous business, but there is rumor that she is more interested in taking it over than finding a husband. Midoriya grinned shyly at her and set an elbow on the balcony, propping his chin in his palm. The moonlight reflected in his eyes, which were entirely focused on her. I could not help but notice that you refrained from mentioning yourself. His words were bold, but she heard the shyness in his voice, the combination causing her to blush. Oh, well, I am indeed single, Ochako said lamely. There were plenty of things that she could have said that would perhaps make her look better. She could hear Suyu telling her not to put herself down. There was no way she could compete with the other young women here. However, she thought of Midoriya's story about his mother, how strong she had been to raise her son on her own, and felt inspired enough to be a little bold. A smile slid onto her face and Ochako teased, I'm the worst of them all, of course. I am the only child of merchants. Anyone can tell you about the state of my family's fortune. I'm in desperate need of a husband that will help them. She stood up straight, for once not feeling any sort of embarrassment or shame. Why should she? She hailed from a wonderful family. So what if they weren't as wealthy as others in fortune? She was happy. That was more than many other women could say. My parents are incredibly hardworking people. They have provided me a comfortable life and instilled in me a proper work ethic. I can only hope to find a match that will make them proud. There was a light in Midoriya's eyes that Ochako could not miss, even in the dark, a spark of interest that she'd never had directed towards her in such a forward manner. She did not remember either of them moving closer to one another, but the once appropriate distance between them had been closed, their hands resting next to each other on the railing. For the first time in a while, she felt hope glow in her heart, thinking that he might ask if they could return inside and dance, especially when he opened his mouth. And then the door at her left opened and his companion's voice aired over the din of music behind him. "There you are, Midoriya. I've been searching the entire house for you. I thought perhaps you'd run off." His presence sliced through whatever string that had begun to pull Ochako and Midoriya together, and that hope dimmed as he pulled away from her. Midoriya turned to face his friend. "No, I haven't been scared off just yet. I needed a bit of air, is all. All those pretty ladies fawning over you getting to be too much," Kirishima teased. So he knew of Midoriya's struggle with unbetrothed women hounding him but remained unbothered. "I won't listen to your mumbling anymore. There is a very beautiful and clever young lady of good fortune inquiring about you, and it's time that you do more than hide in the corner of the room. Come, have some fun." Looking very torn, his expression almost pained, Midoriya's gaze turned from Kirishima and then back to Ochako, who his friend just seemed to notice on the balcony with them. Kirishima's eyebrows raised, but then Midoriya started. Thank you for your company," Ochako interrupted in a smooth tone, giving him a polite curtsy despite her short behavior. "You unexpectedly lifted my spirits." How she could keep her voice so level when she felt as if her heart was trembling was beyond her, but she managed it, even upon meeting Midoriya's sad eyes. "I must return to Miss Asui. I've been gone for too long and she's bound to worry what's become of me." Without waiting for him to respond, Ochako turned on her heels and strode back inside the ballroom past Kirishima. She had known the second that Kirishima had begun to speak that Midoriya would not want to disappoint his friend. He had a good heart, one that seemed as set on pleasing people as hers was. He would apologize, excuse himself, and then find himself in the company of a young woman with much better prospects than her. She could understand that, respect it even. After all, they were doing what needed to be done for their families. It did not make her feel any better, but instead of letting it dampen her spirits, she used her conversation with him to bolster her. She would be outgoing and warm, as she was with Suyu, instead of withdrawn and insecure. As soon Suyu saw her, she excused herself from the conversation she was in and walked over to her, grasping Ochako's hands. "How are you faring? I was half in mind to come looking for you." "I'm quite all right, thank you," Ochako responded, honestly this time. As hurt as she had felt when she'd realized that Midoriya would choose the young woman that Kirishima had brought up over her, if only to appease him, she did feel better. Perhaps she had been holding herself back because of her own fears. How could she expect to find a suitor if she did not open up in the slightest? Even then, if she did not, would it be the end of her world? Would she suddenly lose meaning or purpose? It was not what Midoriya's mother had done, and she had been in a much worse position than Ochako or her parents. Out of the corner of her eyes, she saw Midoriya standing near the fireplace again. He was listening to Miss Toga Himiko, who was talking in her typical excited fashion. As if sensing that her eyes were upon him, he glanced at her and gave her a minuscule smile that she couldn't help but return. He looked almost helpless, but was too polite to say anything. She had warned him about her intensity. Likely she would approach him multiple times tonight. She was beautiful enough to do that without it appearing unbecoming. "Pardon me," a deep voice said, pulling her attention away from Midoriya. Ochako's whole demeanor brightened when she saw who had interrupted her thoughts. "Lieutenant Iida, I was unaware of your return. I did so last night," Tenya Iida told her. Being the fourth son in a family with money almost as old as the Todorokis, he had been left with few options of what he might do since he would not inherit his family's estate. Despite coming from wealth, the Iidas were known for being a military family, considering it an honor to serve for their country. She had known Tenya for most of her life, to the point where he was like a brother to her. If they had not been in the presence of so many people, she would have thrown her arms around him to pull him into a hug. "Miss Asui informed me that you have been avoiding anyone who asks you to dance," Tenya said in an almost disapproving tone. Ochako shot Suyu an incredulous look, although her friend did not look even the slightest ashamed. "Surely you will not deny me one after I have been gone for so long." Ochako took his outstretched hand. "I would not dare." As Tenya guided her onto floor where others were dancing, eyes were drawn to them. It was not often that Ochako entertained the idea of dancing, as Suyu had pointed out on multiple occasions. Besides, Tenya came from a very well-to-do family, and the fact that he had asked her to dance spoke volumes. Their close acquaintance was not known by everyone, so she knew that many of the other women in the room gazed at them with disbelief and some of the men with actual intrigue. "You look lovely tonight," Tenya said as they danced. He was much more practiced at this than she was, having been given lessons from the moment he could walk. "Of course, you always do. And you are as handsome as you are kind," Ochako replied. "I'm not the only one to have noticed," Tenya pointed out, turning her around to the music so that she could see Midoriya again. He was dancing with Miss Hagakure now, and she was laughing at something he said, but his eyes were on her. "I do not recognize him, but he's acquainted with Mr. Kirishima and seems to have many admirers already." Ochako strived for an even tone as she answered, "That would be Mr. Midoriya, the heir to the Toshinori estate. I must confess, he is not what I expected when I heard the news," Tenya admitted. She could agree with that assessment. Midoriya had been nothing short of surprising. "I will need to introduce myself to him later. If I'd known you would be here, I would have told him to seek you out," Ochako said without thinking. "He's of a very agreeable nature." Tenya quirked an eyebrow. "You've spoken with him already?" "I." Ochako blushed. "I might have tripped and fallen into him." "Well, you must have made quite the impression," Tenya said, much to Ochako's embarrassment. It wasn't long before the song ended. Ochako parted from Tenya and readied herself to return to the side of the room when another young gentleman appeared at her side and asked for a dance. With a pleased smile on her face, she took his hand and let him sweep her away from Tenya. It was fun, letting herself get taken in by the music, dancing around the room. Surprisingly, it did not end there. After that dance ended, someone else asked her to dance and then another. Instead of focusing on any of them, Ochako decided to only think of herself. She laughed, despite being told it was unattractive. She teased when it felt appropriate. She was quick on her feet and smiled. What did it matter if her demeanor was appealing or appeased the young men that asked her to dance? She was as lively as she wanted to be, her only goal to be true to herself. As she had grown older, she had hid herself more. Afraid that her free spirit would turn any potential suitors away, she had begun to lock it up. She didn't want to do that anymore. What was the point? So she could find a husband that would lead her to a life of misery. Would her parents truly want that for her? The entire time she danced without a care in the world, Midoriya stayed on the outskirts, coming in close only to be snatched away again. Having been convinced to dance by Kirishima and Miss Hagakure, he found himself bouncing from one partner to the next. As Ochako twirled with one gentleman, she brushed past Midoriya, who looked so mind-boggled that she could only giggle. He would disappear from her view for a while, only to appear again with someone else, having become quite popular, just as she had expected and he had feared. There were a few times when she thought that he might ask her to dance. His eyes focused on hers across the floor and he would stride towards her after the song finished, only to be taken by someone else at the last second. Instead of getting upset, she continued to dance, even pulling Suyu and Momo out with her. Ochako could not remember feeling so wonderful in such company before. All night, she found herself thoughtlessly moving towards him, pulled away from him just as he was from her, as if some higher force was trying to keep them apart for the night. There would only a few more dances before dinner would be upon them and Ochako yearned to dance with the one gentleman to catch her interest. Before she could ask him though, Miss Himiko approached him again, as intense as ever. Ochako started to turn, searching for a refreshment, when she saw Midoriya say something and then smile apologetically before bowing and turning away from her. His green eyes found Ochako's immediately and lit up like the moon in the night sky. Ochako did not move as Midoriya pushed his way through the crowd towards her, ignoring anyone that might distract him, until he was standing right in front of her. She gave him a cool look, but could not hide the smile from her face for long. "Did you need something, Mr. Midoriya?" "A dance, if you are not yet done," Midoriya answered, holding out his hand. "I don't believe that I have ever seen anyone with such spirit as you tonight. I confess that I am normally not on such occasions," Ochako said, tilting her chin to gaze up at him, "but someone inspired me to be courageous." She took his hand and he smiled brightly. "I would be delighted." This time, when Midoriya guided Ochako to the floor, she didn't pay any mind to the eyes on them, even though she knew that they'd drawn the attention of everyone. As one of the most eligible bachelors, the fact that he was dancing with her of all the young ladies here was a shock. He must have known what he was doing, as even some of the men murmured to each other, but he didn't seem to care. His eyes never left hers as they got into the proper dancing position, not even after the music began and they started to move. Ochako felt lighter than air and her heart drummed strongly in her chest. As much fun as she'd had dancing with everyone else, this felt like so much more. She glowed with giddiness, a bounce in her step, which Midoriya mirrored. There was a remarkable difference in how he held himself. Gone was helpless glimmer in his eyes or nervous steps or pulling on his clothes. His dancing was fluid, his touch warm, his gaze inviting. She felt so right in his hands, as if they fit together better than any puzzle. Maybe she was making too much of it, but when the song ended, neither one of them moved to let go of each other. She saw a lady approach to take her place, but Midoriya didn't take his gaze away from her and, when the next song began, they moved as one again. It would have been curious behavior if it happened only once, but they did not part for the next song or the one after that. Neither of them were of the mind to dance with anyone else. They had found their partners for the rest of the night. By the time the music finished, she and Midoriya had danced 5 songs together. Her cheeks were rosier than normal and that shy smile was back on his face, but it was only when dinner was announced did they fully part. She was lightheaded from all the dancing and drinking, but she would have gladly continued to dance the night away. Dinner would separate them, as there was arranged seating. She was not as the same status as him and would be forced to return to the reality of her life. And yet, she didn't feel disheartened, not with the way he was looking at her now. Midoriya bowed. "Thank you for dancing with me. I was not expecting so many, but I'm very pleased that you did not leave." His words were polite and warm, but she felt as if he was holding himself back. It made her heart race even more. Had they been in private and not in front of so many people, would he have done more? "Well, if any of the other gentlemen were half as interesting as you, perhaps I would have danced with them more," Ochako replied. As people started for the dining room, Midoriya caught eyes with Kirishima and turned back to her. "I know the night is not yet over, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you now." He reached out, as if to take her hand again, but then hesitated. She crossed the distance for him, lifting her hand, and he held it delicately in his. "Pardon me if this is too bold, but may I write to you?" Her heart skipped a beat and she nodded her head without thinking, unable to speak for a moment. A huge grin split across his face, making him look younger, and she couldn't help but do the same. However, she caught something in the corner of her eyes that took her attention away. Distracted as she had been by her dances with Midoriya, she hadn't noticed the disdainful looks and faint scowls from the other women in the room. She could feel herself wilting under their gazes. No doubt they disapproved of this pairing. They did not believe that she was worthy of Midoriya's attention. "I would love that," Ochako managed carefully, but... She bit her lip and he furrowed his brow. "You know my family's status. How do you know that I'm not simply trying to charm you for your wealth?" Her gaze swept around the room. Most of the women didn't even bother to hide the fact that they were watching her. "Anyone could tell you here that I am not a suitable match for you." And I could tell you that you are the only young lady here that would not and did not look at me with distaste when I opened up about my past, Midoriya responded, his face smoothing out. He grasped her hand so that she did not pull away, making his affections even more known. It was not too long ago that these same people would not have even looked at me twice. They have little interest in knowing what the world is like beyond their lives of luxury. Ochako leaned in and whispered in a conspiratory tone, "That is because almost all of them are sticks in the mud." The two of them shared a quiet laugh. It wasn't like the one she had heard from him outside, but it was sweet. Still, she could not help but hesitate. "Are you certain?" The ladies here are attractive, clever, and agreeable with wealth and status, but it is easy to see that they seek not me but what my title will give them, Midoriya told her firmly. "I know this is forward of me to say, Miss Uraraka, but I trust you, as you have been more upfront and honest with me tonight than anyone here. That is more important to me than your family's status, the same as it was for Mr. Toshinori and mine." He finally dropped her hand, the warmth lingering, but she felt close to him still. "Despite my background, he entrusted me with the future of his estate. I do not think anyone else here could possibly understand that but you." "Perhaps you think too much of me," Ochako said. She felt somewhat overwhelmed, but hope soared in the air. Of course she had come here tonight with the intentions of sparking something that might lead to a potential match, but had abandoned the notion early on. She could not find something that she did not truly want. Midoriya was different though. He wasn't just a possible suitor. He was a possibility for something more. "Or maybe you think too little of yourself," Midoriya quipped. Maybe she had. So much of her life had been ruled by status and the belief that she was lower than others, but perhaps she was worth more than that. Perhaps she had more to offer than some of the ladies here. She was not her station. She was Ochako Uraraka and she had plenty to give other than money. Midoriya saw that in her. It was time that she saw it in herself as well. Judging by tonight, the moment she did and stopped hiding it, she shined bright enough for others to pick her out in a crowd. And maybe, just maybe, there was more love for her than she dreamed possible. Where stories live, discover now.